The following is a Cartoonerific Studios presentation.
Welcome to Cartoon Fun, it's Cartoonerific. Yeah! It's Cartoonerific.
Well, welcome to the Cartoonerific Podcast, Classic Animated Cartoons. I'm Brian Mitchell, and I am your host. On today's show, we have a wonderful conversation with animator Nancy Beiman. That's going to be coming up next. I do want to talk about Michel Gagné. He was on for 2 weeks. We had 2 episodes with him, and we just concluded the second part last Friday. Michel actually gave me access to the first 40 minutes of his feature film that he is personally animating, and he's wrote it, and he's directing it, and he's animating it, and producing it, and all that wonderful stuff. And so I finally got around to sitting down and watching it, and wow. It really is amazing. You know, it used to be years ago when somebody sent a letter to the Walt Disney Studios and they said, how long would it take one person to animate a feature film? And the Disney studio responded something like 100 years. It would take 100 years for one person to animate an entire feature film in full animation. Well, Michel did 40 minutes of this, and there's other work in progress that I did not see, but from what I did see, it is an amazing film that parallels, you can compare it to some of the best animation out there. It is that good, and it looks like they had $175 million to make it, and that's not the case. Michel did a wonderful job with it. And when it cut off at 40 minutes, I was kind of like, no, I want to see the rest of this. And it was so wonderful. And it was refreshing. The effects animation is amazing in it. The backgrounds are really wonderful. And hats off to Michel Gagné for a wonderful, wonderful film. I can't wait to see the whole thing. So like I said, I only saw 40 minutes of it, but I'm telling you, when it finished, I was like, I want more. So anyway, it was really wonderful and very unique. And the name of that film is Michel Gagné's The Saga of Rex. And it's something worth waiting for. It's that good. Anyway, coming up next is today's special guest, Nancy Beiman. Stay tuned and don't go away.
You're listening to the Cartoonerific Podcast, Classic Animated Cartoons, with your host animator, Brian Mitchell. And now it's time for our special Cartoonerific guest.
Boy, do we have a treat for you today. Today's guest is an accomplished artist, accomplished animator, has worked at many different studios, including Disney and Warner Brothers, and she's working on some personal projects. I'm really glad that she decided to come on the show. Well, please, everybody, welcome master animator, wonderful artist, Nancy Beiman. Hi, Nancy. How are you today?
Oh, very well, thank you.
Well, thank you for
asking me.
Oh, thank you for accepting. What's your favorite animated film?
People ask me that a lot, and I don't get involved with any of these lists because I ask, well, do you mean American? Do you mean hand-drawn? Do you mean CGI? Do you mean puppet? How about glass or food?
Stop motion. Yeah.
Stop motion. What are we talking about? I don't have a favorite, but I can name some that were truly impressive.
Okay.
On the modern film, and by modern, it's already about 34 years old now.
Wow.
And it is a film called Creature Comforts by Nick Park.
Yes.
Absolutely heartbreaking and hilarious film.
What a talent he is, right?
Well, he built that around a series. It was the third in a series of films about people talking. And everybody else did them just doing that, just talking.
Right.
And he had the brilliant idea of turning them into animals and making a commentary on how everybody is really in a zoo in that film. They're in a nursing home. They're in kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
They're in a project.
Yeah.
And then he didn't tell them they were going to be turned into animals. He did these absolutely brilliant framing device for the Brazilian panther. I actually pay, quote, tribute to that in my comic strip that's coming up.
Wow.
Some characters from Brazil, and they're going to say, in Brazil, we have a space. It's a line from that panther. Absolutely knockout of a film. Another one, of course, if we're going to go, again, different subject matter, Hollywood films.
Mm-hmm.
Short film, Feed the Kitty by Chuck Jones.
Yes.
It is a film that, again, is funny and heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
And you notice I'm finding films with there's a certain theme I go for.
Yeah.
They have heart.
Mm-hmm.
They are hilarious, but there's also a genuine... Warner cartoons are not known for sentimentality.
No.
And Chuck is not sentimental, but it's a love story between two different species.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, for features, my favorite Disney feature is Pinocchio.
Yeah, that's mine.
Another amazing film with one of the greatest epiphanies in any motion picture.
Mm-hmm.
And I taught with all three of these films.
Wow.
And in Pinocchio, the most crucial scene is after Pleasure Island.
Mm-hmm.
Get that note from the Blue Fairy. And Jiminy says, well, Geppetto's been eaten by a whale. And Pinocchio goes, goodbye, Jiminy.
Mm-hmm.
And he suddenly takes the lead. He's no longer the puppet.
Right.
He's a puppet for the first half, does everything everybody else suggests. Suddenly he's taking the lead.
Yeah, that's right.
And that scene is what makes that picture hold together. You really care about these characters.
Yeah.
And that this character has evolved.
Mm-hmm.
It is an amazing film. And the Blu-ray, I was telling John Musker just recently, is so good. You can see all of the effects that Ken O'Connor told us about because he worked on them.
Sure.
And I never understood what he was talking about until I saw the Blu-ray.
Yeah.
Like there's three-dimensional effects on the whale, done with Xerox in 1938.
Right.
And the effects that Oscar Fischinger animated on the Blue Fairy's dress are only showing up on the Blu-ray.
Yeah.
And just you look at this and say, what a magnificent work of art. It's one of the top 10 films ever made, never mind animation.
Right.
So I have so many others that I love.
Mm-hmm.
Monroe by Gene Deitch.
Right. Right.
These are all films that involve a conflict that involve, in this case, it's a horrible case of bureaucracy gone wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And the little kid nobody believes it. Nobody listens to him until he starts to cry.
Right.
Again, there's some tragedy in these films.
Yeah.
So I think that is the sort of subtext that goes through films that I genuinely think are great. But I don't have a favorite animated film because there's so much variety in animation.
Oh, absolutely.
It's so much more interesting than live action.
Yeah. I've always felt that way. I've always felt that when an animated film is done right, the emotions are heightened. Everything's heightened by the color and the animation and the music and even the acting, the voice acting, if it's done right.
Well, animated films, of course, predate sound, and there are some great silent cartoons, but it really does come to life with sound.
Yes.
And when it's done right, they're just little jewels, and they were looked down on by serious, quote, filmmakers.
Right.
I enjoy it because you can be anything.
Yes, that's right.
If I wanted to be an actress, I'd have to be a character actress. I could only have certain kinds of roles. And plus, as a young woman, I didn't like being stared at.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you don't want to be on stage for that. So if you're
Right.
behind Bugs Bunny, and you can be Bugs Bunny,
Right.
and you can be Snoopy, and you can be Donald Duck.
You could be anything.
And I could be a 700-year-old Russian gnome. I played that. I played talking furniture, not for Disney, but I did for others. And in Werner, I was basically doing some rather strange-looking people in German markets, crazy-looking cartoons,
Right.
aliens.
Wow.
And I'm now doing talking dogs and cats and kids.
Pretty neat.
So the thing about animation, you are, I always say you are in a symphony. My father was a symphonic musician.
Wow.
Played oboe and English horn. He was superb at it.
Very neat.
There's very little that he could do by himself.
Right.
So he had to play with at least 4 other people, and he usually was with a 100-piece orchestra. It adds up to something greater than the sum of its parts. So that's animation.
Yes, absolutely.
Unless you're Bill Plimpton or Nina Paley or Signe Bauman, who make films by themselves. Now, in a comic strip, jazz soloist, and you're playing a cappella.
Right.
And you're sometimes asked to jam with a few other people, and that's comics. I'm enjoying it very much.
Well, good. Where did you grow up?
I was born in New Jersey, and because my dad was teaching, and he got eventually with the New Jersey Symphony Orchestra.
Wow.
All the relatives lived in New York. All the fun came from New York. And the first thing I remember seeing in this lifetime is the skyline of Manhattan seen from New Jersey.
Yes.
That's where all the postcards are taken. So that was the way it looked in 1959. I'm one of the people who will see what no one else will ever see again.
Right.
I can see that still in my dreams, what it looked like to me at the age of 2.
Wow.
It was Oz. It was Oz. It was magic. And all the fun came from there.
Absolutely.
And my parents would take us to the Museum of Modern Art because it was, at the time, either free or pay what you can.
Right.
And they had films, silent films.
Interesting.
They had stuff that wasn't shown anywhere else.
Right.
And I learned to read at a Harold Lloyd film called The Freshman, which is a great 1925 picture, which has heart. It has a scene in it where poor Harold, who has gone to college and he's only watched movies about college students from the 20s, which are supremely stupid.
Yeah.
They knew that even then. And of course, he looks like a jerk when he goes to a real college.
Right.
Even has a stupid little dance he does. And there's this girl who takes pity on him because she knows he's being played for a fool.
Right.
And after one terrible thing that happens to him, funny and terrible, he breaks down and cries on her shoulder.
Wow.
And Harold Lloyd cut that out in later years, thinking people wouldn't want to see it. It's brilliant, and it has to be there.
Sure.
It comes right after one of the most hilarious scenes in the film. It's very much, I'd say, an influence on Walt Disney. Disney looked at these films and saw you alternate some heart with high comedy. You can't just do high comedy all through a feature.
Right.
And I did a paper on Chaplin's influence on Disney, which is, I'd say, I'm very proud of it. It was quite an important paper. And the correspondence between the two of them and the way they worked together, they were friends.
Yeah.
It's impressive. And at one point, Disney says, well, Chaplin told me to slow down. Well, he does that a little too much, and sometimes it makes me itch, but he was right.
Yeah. You could see...
two of them were Chaplin helped Disney a lot.
Yeah. You could see that. You could definitely see that in the films.
Not the way you think.
Okay.
He helped Snow White. He helped them get Snow White released so they could actually make money with it. Because the Disney brothers no one had ever made an animated feature, and the Disney brothers had no idea how much to charge.
Right.
And they weren't with Chaplin's company anymore, United Artists. They went with RKO because RKO had better distribution. There is a letter in the Disney archives that I got sent to me. It said, Chaplin goes, I will not stand in Walt's way. I'll help him any way I can.
Very neat. Yeah.
And he did.
Wow.
Because when the Disney brothers have to deal with these sharks at RKO, they're used to having 12, 13 films. Here's one film. What do you do?
Yeah.
Oh, we'll ask Chaplin, how much did he get from Modern Times? Chaplin said, here's the books.
Wow.
I'm telling you, that really happened.
Wow.
And a letter from Roy Disney in the archives said, thank you, Mr. Chaplin. Without you, we would have been sheep among wolves.
Yeah.
So they helped each other, and
Mhm.
Disney helped Chaplin. But let's get back to that some other time.
We will.
You could make one hell of a live-action film about the relationship between those two men, how it changed in 1947 when Disney testified. That's when Chaplin said, I never want to hear his name again.
Wow.
But they'd known each other for a very long time.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You should write it.
I'd need help with it, and I'm too busy doing my comic strip. I'd love to do a screenplay of it.
Yeah.
So as far as my own upbringing, I grew up in a family that loved the arts, unusual because no one else in the family did. My dad was a musician and a teacher, which means he wasn't paid all that well.
Right.
Mom at the time was staying at home, but she had art training at Erasmus Hall in Brooklyn. She studied with one of the abstract expressionists, actually.
Oh.
And I said, well, what was he like? Oh, he didn't want to be there. He didn't want to teach. Okay. She didn't paint. She just took the courses.
Yeah.
Dad was a professional musician. And I grew up, the first music I ever heard in my life was Summertime from Porgy and Bess, because Dad was doing his master's thesis on Gershwin.
Right.
I heard it over and over, learned all the lyrics.
Very neat.
First song I ever heard.
Wow.
And
how old were you?
I would have been under the age of 2.
Wow.
He got his degree around 1961 or thereabouts, and I went to his graduation.
Neat.
Yeah, I can remember basically just having to pick little red bugs off my clothes from the bleachers. My grandmother was babysitting my baby sister.
Right.
So art was considered an honorable profession in our family. In fact, desirable.
Right.
And I started drawing because I went to a very poor school. The school had no money. This is Newark, New Jersey, 1962. There's no money.
Yeah.
And so the kindergarten had, I think, one small toy pedal car and a toy kitchen out of cardboard.
Yikes.
This is for like 30 kids.
Yeah.
And kids would fight to get into the kitchen to play. They would let one boy and one girl in at a time.
Inside the box.
Toy kitchen. Yeah, they would have these toy pots and things, and all they would do is throw the pots at each other and start screaming who was going to take out the garbage. I hope they were making that up, but I was bored. I started drawing.
Right.
Because there was literally nothing else to do. I was told I didn't pick up a pencil until then. And I haven't put it down since.
Do you remember what you started drawing at first?
Squirrels, because they were there. Dogs, because I desperately wanted one.
Right.
And dragons, because I liked them.
Very neat.
As soon as I learned to read at that Harold Lloyd film, I was reading the titles to my little sister. I started reading Peanuts.
Ah.
Of course, Snoopy, passionately fond of Snoopy because I desperately wanted a dog.
Yeah.
And I would read the funnies to my dad. My mother was not interested in comics.
Right.
Dad loved them. In fact, we'd argue over who got the Sunday paper sections, my sister or my dad and I. Absolutely loved reading the funnies and loved watching Bugs Bunny because it was kind of a dreary life.
Yeah.
And he was joy. And my parents, by the way, never reminisced about anything in their childhood except going to the movies.
Oh, okay.
Well, it wasn't fun growing up in the Depression.
Yeah, no.
Nobody had any money. So the movies, if anyone ever tells you, oh, those Disney silly symphonies are so sugary, people had lousy lives. They didn't want to see gray, dull stuff. They wanted color and joy.
Yeah.
And they could get the crap at home. They didn't have to go to the movies to see that.
Right.
But the black and white Popeyes are also great fun.
Oh, they're wonderful cartoons.
I love some of those.
Yeah. I grew up on those Popeyes.
Grew up on all of them.
Yeah.
And they were your friends.
Yeah, they were.
So getting to animate them later on, I didn't animate Popeye, but Bugs Bunny, oh my goodness, and Snoopy. Couldn't ask for anything more. Donald Duck, love Donald Duck.
Sure.
Mickey's good. Mickey's hard to animate. You can do good stories for Mickey if you try.
Yeah.
The world is much easier to write for. And Goofy turned out to be the best actor of them all.
Yeah.
But you can definitely, they did a good Mickey feature called Mickey's Three Musketeers, which is wonderful.
That's right. Didn't Dan Haskin have something to do with that?
I never asked him. I thought Linda did. Linda worked on the sequel to the Goofy movie, an extremely goofy movie, and she did some wonderful stuff in there. How did you get away with that? And she said it used to be a lot worse, and I had to pull it back. She did the LSD sequence with Goofy getting high. I couldn't believe they got that into a Disney film.
Yeah.
And
that is pretty incredible.
And the Coffee House Girl.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely loved her. I would have loved to have animated that character.
Wow.
But you see, animation is also about performance.
Mm-hmm.
Comics are about writing.
Yeah.
It's totally script driven, whereas animation is performance driven. So when I went into comics, I had to unlearn an awful lot of stuff that I used to do.
Right.
And I had help from Lynn Johnston, but I also had this amazing book by Charles M. Schulz.
My Life with Charlie Brown.
Highly enough.
Wow.
It's his lessons in cartooning.
Very neat book. I never knew about that book.
It came out in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
It's a collection of articles that appeared in magazines that were never collected before. And some are unpublished.
Wow.
And they are, I've got to read this book again.
Yeah.
Reading it just before I got the idea for the strip. Maybe that's what inspired me. But he is incredibly good at telling you how this works.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most inspirational people in my life. My style of animation could be said is a large part influenced by Chuck Jones,
mm-hmm.
Charles Schulz, and Walt Kelly.
Wow. Walt Kelly was an excellent artist.
He was a hell of an artist. I was also very good friends with Mrs. Walt Kelly, Selby Kelly.
Wow.
So I saw stuff that has never been in any book. I learned things about him there's no biography of Walt Kelly.
Yeah. Not yet.
And there's 3 of Ernie Bushmill. And what is wrong with people?
Yeah. It's incredible, right?
Yeah. And I'd love to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I don't have the time. I'd also love to do one on Tee-Hee,
mm-hmm.
another person who badly needs one. But the thing with Kelly is he was a brilliant cartoonist who asked to transfer into animation from story.
Yeah.
And went into Ward Kimball's unit.
That's right.
He's just natural at it. And if you get a chance to see a film called We Have Met the Enemy and He Is Us,
mm-hmm.
I helped preserve the animatic version because there was only one print left.
Right.
I got Greg Ford at Warner's transferred it at my request because it's going to disappear forever if you don't.
Yeah.
The short version, which Kelly animated, was very easy to see for a while, and it was done for Earth Day 1971.
Mm-hmm.
Its animation is amazing.
Wow.
It's one of the all-time greats.
Was he considered an animator back in the day, or was he an assistant?
No, he was originally in story.
Right.
His story work starts in 1935.
Mm-hmm.
And his drawing isn't that good. He had to learn like everybody else.
Right.
And he worked on Fantasia.
Mm-hmm.
I know for sure he was on the Pastorelle sequence.
Okay.
I'm not sure about others, but I know that when Dumbo came around, he asked he animated on Pinocchio.
Mm.
And you would not believe what he did. And I couldn't believe it either. The sequence where
mm-hmm.
Geppetto is fishing inside the whale.
Yes.
That's Kelly.
Wow. Okay.
He's animating Geppetto. Eric Larson is animating Figaro. And what Kelly, this is incredible work.
Yeah.
Then he goes over and works on Dumbo. He does a lot of the dancing scenes on the crows.
Right.
But he asked to transfer to animation from story to get more of a feel for what was needed.
Wow.
So, yeah, he was just an amazing inspiration to me. And I grew up reading Pogo and Peanuts and all the comics. I read like 50 or 60 comics.
Yeah. Wow.
But I knew very early on if it said Charles M. Jones or Chuck Jones, it was a good cartoon. Unless it was a Sniffles, I didn't care. Or Conrad.
Neither did I. I was not a big fan of Sniffles. I watched so many of them.
Chuck had to learn like everybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was also when he hooked up with like Ted Pierce and with Michael Maltese that he started to kind of gel as a director.
Well, there were other storymen as well, and Maltese mentioned some of them when he came to CalArts. Tubby Millar is on some of those early
That's right.
Jones films as well. It's hard to say if it's one person or not. Chuck definitely worked better with a good writer, and Maltese said it wasn't that Chuck was better than the other directors, but he was willing to try new things.
Yeah.
And that's true of animators too. You don't want to do the same thing all the time.
Right.
I've always been bored doing the same thing all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, you got way off topic here.
No, that's all right. I just want to stay with that for a second because, Frizz did some different things here and there.
Oh, I love, what a very underrated director.
Yes.
His work in the 40s is some of the funniest of Warner's. And I just love this guy. I also am a big fan of Bob McKimson.
Yes.
Daffy Doodles has me in hysterics every time I see it.
Yeah.
Easter Yeggs.
Mm-hmm. I love this Honeymooners stuff when he did the Honeymooners with the mice.
I'm not a big fan of his later work.
Yeah.
And I never cared for Foghorn Leghorn. It's just not my, I'm a city mouse, not interested in that kind of character.
It's not your thing. But Chuck Jones with Dover Boys.
Oh, yeah.
Or Waikiki Rabbit.
Those are great. And just wonder, and also Case of the Missing Hair.
Yeah.
It's all sorts of wonderful effects. And when I interviewed Maurice Noble, just before he died, I got the last interview with him.
He's amazing. He was amazing.
He told me, first of all, with UPA, he said they didn't influence us. We were there first. And he's right.
Mm-hmm.
But I did get to say to him, I think you guys did better than Disney because you had so much less to work with. He said, we always do that.
Mm-hmm. It seemed like Disney was trying to catch up to what Warner's was doing.
Disney did some amazing things and then abandoned them.
Yeah.
They would do it once and then they'd go off and forget about it and somebody else would pick it up. If you take a look, quite a few things do originate with Disney.
Mm-hmm.
Then they just don't follow up on it until somebody else does.
Right.
But Disney is a leader until about 1945.
Right.
Then they get, partly the war, but partly just they get more towards that realistic look, which I think hurt them badly.
Yeah.
And Ward Kimball was the only one who really stayed in the cartoon dimension, and he was made a director. So his television work from the 50s is some of the very best stuff Disney was doing.
Oh, that stuff is wonderful. Man in Space,
yes.
Mars and Beyond.
Yes, Ken O'Connor worked on those too, and told us about working with Kimball, and very funny stories. Now, you want to hear the story about Disney's ghost story from Disney?
Yeah, I want to hear it.
This is a true one.
Okay, all right.
Now, I was a trainee.
Okay.
1977. No, 77. Yes, it would be 1977.
Okay.
And I was there for 4 weeks only because it was a little scholarship they gave you, if you were still going to stay in the school.
Right.
And I won't name who was showing me around, but somebody was trying to impress me.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, there's a story here that after we die, we all go to work with Walt on another picture. I said, there's only one thing wrong with this story. He didn't tell me if that was heaven or hell. A lot of people have had it attributed that it is my line.
That's great.
I've heard both opinions of Mr. Disney.
Yeah.
Even the people who didn't like him told me how much they respected what he did for animation.
Yeah, there was definitely a love-hate. There was a love-hate relationship with him because he could be a little bit mean sometimes.
He was a complicated man.
Yeah.
And of course, the story about him not hiring women is not true.
Yeah, I know that.
Well, I met Retta Scott, and I asked her about that. And I've seen her work at the Walt Disney Family Museum.
Right.
They have her storyboards there.
Mm-hmm.
She was a fantastic artist, and Ken O'Connor said she was the best draftsman, male or female, in the studio.
Oh, boy.
And it was Frank Thomas who said, well, she's storyboarded those dogs. She should animate them.
Right.
So Frank was always very supportive. And when I asked him, though,
we
had a lot of women in story back then. Is it because they understood children or because they were cheaper? He said both.
Yeah.
Frank was a good friend and a good man. He was very, he hired for talent.
Yeah.
So
miss those guys. Yeah.
Yeah, I miss Frank very much. And Ollie, they were just good friends.
Yeah. I met them a few times. Yeah.
I was friends with them for about 20 years. I had many, many letters.
Yeah.
And I have to get some of them back to Ted Thomas. I promised him that.
Yeah. I know I know a couple of people corresponded. We had people on the podcast. We were just talking things, people I've known for years. They said, "Oh yeah, I wrote to Frank Thomas, and we were like pen pals, like writing back and forth." And I never knew that.
I visited them at their homes when I was out in California.
Over up in they were north of Pasadena, there somewhere, La Cañada, Flint Ridge. Yeah, interesting.
So I enjoyed Disney because it was a class act.
Yeah.
I worked for Warner's as well, and the thing with Warner's is the characters are wonderful, but the management really didn't want to do animated films. They didn't consider them to be films, and it was not a pleasant place to work although I enjoyed the projects and I really loved the characters. With Disney, they actually liked animation and wanted people to see it.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
The first thing other people said when they came in was, "Thank God people will finally see what we're doing."
Yeah.
Now, I've always liked the acting part of animation, but again, if story is weak, all the good acting in the world does not help save the picture.
That's the truth.
And we know you mentioned Mr. Bluth, I can name other studios, I won't name them all, but it's usually the story.
Yeah.
The good ones where they would listen to artists. For example, at Disney, John Musker and Ron Clements would have us write suggestions for what we could see in the film. If they liked what you said, they would adapt it.
Yeah.
And that makes, I think, a better film. You say, okay, we will accept suggestions from other people, including the in-betweeners, including people who aren't even on the picture, if it'll make the film better.
Yeah. Well,
if your script's locked, you're not going to make it better.
The talent, the people who really know are really good editors. They could hear an idea and go, "That's it. That's great," and not put it down because of the person it came from, wherever they're working for in production. They need to realize where those good ideas are and then implement them, use them. So.
Well, that's what a good producer does. There's a wonderful Australian saying, "You don't hire a dog and then bark yourself."
That's right.
It's a great saying, and it's true. If you are a good producer, you hire people, allow them to work together. Again, that's animation.
Yes.
You're on your own. And you're getting, in the case where I'm working online, a digital, online comic.
Right.
I'm getting instantaneous feedback from the readers.
It's great.
And some of it is like, "Oh my, did I blow it on this one? I thought it was a good one." That happens very rarely, but it does happen.
Yeah.
And sometimes they'll say, "Oh, I have this happening with my dog. Oh, can I use that?"
Right.
Sure. And I'll send them originals.
Bob Clampett used to say, like, when he was doing a cartoon, if a gag failed, he was like, "Well, there'll be another one right after that."
See, the nice thing about having to make 12 cartoons a year means you can make your mistakes. Chuck made a near fatal one with Dover Boys, as you know. But he came back by tactfully naming a couple of realistic dogs, the Schlesinger dogs, which saved his job. Those are not interesting to watch today at all.
Right.
However, it saved his job, and he went on to better things.
That's right.
Now, I can tell you the idea of having to make a certain number of films per year is a rare treat that no one will ever really have that much unless they're on series work.
Right.
And to make them to the standard of the Warner shorts, which is superb.
Yeah.
They did have to cut back on animation, but the point is they had such great design and great storytelling. The ones with less movement are still a joy to look at.
They are.
And I once asked Chuck, "You have them zip off and leave a cloud of dust. Did you do that for artistic reasons or to save money?" And Chuck said, "At first, it was artistic."
Yeah. That's right.
You turn a liability into an advantage.
Exactly.
And the worst assignment I ever had was do anything you like. That suddenly you don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So I always gave students a constraint. We have this theme, or you use a nursery rhyme, or here's an idea that your class came up with. I love you. I hate you. You're going to illustrate that in a storyboard.
Right.
I never had anybody show up with nothing.
Right. Forces them to be creative.
but it doesn't steer them. It just gives them Disney had a good saying. He said, you plant a seed.
Mhm.
And then you trim away the extraneous blooms and just concentrate on the main bloom.
Right.
Then you plant another seed. He's right. That's features. You don't go off on tangents. But for a short film, you only can have like a small flower.
Yeah, you need the parameters. And people work better that way. People
They
just,
do.
yeah.
They do.
We're going to go back to Jersey. We're running back to Jersey. So anyway, when did you decide? Because you were watching the Looney Tunes and you're watching the Fleischer stuff, and when were you first introduced to like a Disney film, like a feature?
First Disney film I saw in the theaters was Mary Poppins.
Okay.
Profoundly influential film.
Mm-hmm.
Again, great heart.
Yes.
And it took me, you have to watch it as an adult because as a kid, you identify with the children.
Right.
And when you watch it years later, you realize the true hero, the one with the character arc, is Mr. Banks.
Mr. Banks, right.
And there's some wonderful performances. David Tomlinson is just wonderful when he just breaks with that crummy bank he's at.
Mm-hmm.
And there was so much goodness in that film, but it influenced me profoundly because the first thing to show you how powerful a film can be.
Yeah.
As soon as we got out of it, naturally, Dad buys the music in the lobby. They had the sheet music. He had to have that.
Sure.
And my sister and I said, Daddy, we want kites. So we went to a cheap little store called Valley Fair.
Right.
And I got a Superman kite and my sister had a Batman kite.
Right.
And we went out to fly it. We're in a garden apartment, which is, we call them projects today, but they were nice ones. You know, they were low 2-level houses with a green.
Right. Mm-hmm.
The entire neighborhood
Yeah.
was out on that green flying kites.
Wow.
That's how powerful that film was.
Yeah.
For good.
They missed out on
force for good.
They missed out on the merchandising on that one. They could have sold a whole bunch of Mary Poppins kites.
I didn't think that would have been a thing. I think that also the sequel misfires horribly in that respect because the kite is misused. Yeah. And there's so many story holes. And I love some of the animation Ken Duncan did is wonderful. Yeah. But they were trying to upstage the animation with the actors. And in the original, of course, you got the wonderful dance scene with Dick Van Dyke and the Penguins. Right. In addition to flying kites, I was drawing chalk pictures on the street and jumping on them. I seriously thought I could do that. And my sister and I wrote that little note to the nanny, and we tore it up and stuck it on the windowsill. And we figured, okay, it's not going out the window because we don't have a chimney. Right. We honestly really wanted this to happen. Sure. Well,
the whole film is imaginative. I mean, as a kid watching it, it's like you're opening up a present like every couple of minutes. There's always something new and fun and different that you haven't seen before, right? Have you seen any of this stuff in any of the film?
Well, also, I burst into tears at the Bird Woman song.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I found out years later that Mr. Disney cried too.
Yes.
And after, the story about the Shermans playing the song in his office, that was devastating. But it still brings me to tears every time I see it.
There's a story that the Sherman Brothers were at Disneyland and they were playing that song. I think it was in front of the castle. And a dove came down, kind of like hovered, and then it took off. Oh, man. Yeah. Well, the thing is, again, we always said it had heart. Yeah. So all the animated films I've mentioned up until now, with the possible exception of Monroe, have heart. But Monroe has a tragic subtext. Yeah. That this is the terrible, it's the Cold War, basically, destroyed by a child. Right. It's this childish arguments. So, but all the others are sad. There's a sadness, there's heart. Yeah. It's not just slapstick, and I love slapstick. But you do have to leaven it with a little bit of that to get you to care for the characters. And that is where, again, Chaplin taught Disney. And
but the Warner Studio had more of an influence from him than Disney did. I found that out.
Yeah. I think,
Starting with Tex Avery, of all people.
yeah, amazing talent.
Well, I interviewed Tex, and he told me there's only 2 story rules. Can you make it funny?
Mhm.
And can you put a twist in it?
Yeah.
He did not like standard endings, and he told me about how he didn't have an ending to Bad Luck Blackie. You're kidding.
Yeah.
You didn't have an ending?
Mm-hmm.
He goes, no, we didn't have an ending. We just had bigger and bigger things hitting this bulldog.
Right.
But there's a convention in the movies that you always cut back to your hero at the end.
Right.
So I did, and the kitten has that whistle, and he starts doing that bulldog laugh.
Right.
I said, that's brilliant. You didn't have that. He goes, no, we usually had the ending. This time we didn't.
Right.
That is a great dark ending, because that kitten's going to go off and bully some mouse or other.
Yeah.
It's not a good thing that he's got that whistle.
No, it's not.
And it really is. Tex also did an incredible love story called The Legend of Rockabye Point.
Yes.
Which I showed in class. Like, it just looks like a standard, okay, polar bear, dog, penguin chasing each other. Then it turns into a love story.
Absolutely.
You just do not see it coming. It's one of my all-time favorite cartoons.
It is. It's mine. It's one of mine, and it's a Lance cartoon.
Yes, Lance allowed. This is an interesting analysis. A writer told me that Lance had fantastic directors,
mm-hmm.
fantastic animators, but did not have good story people.
Yeah.
And Tex, in that case, I guess, was doing the story, and that and Crazy Mixed Up Pup.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Are wonderful.
Yeah.
You good kid.
Yeah.
I enjoy. I
own-
love comedy because life has
mm-hmm.
enough tragedy.
Yes.
Don't need to add to it.
No. And that's what those cartoons were made for. They're made for people to go into the theater and get a good belly laugh. And
I wonder what they played with.
Yeah. I don't know. That'd be interesting to look back on and see what these shorts played with, to see if they played.
I found out in the case of some of the Disney films.
Yeah.
It's they didn't always play with Disney features or Warner features. They played with whatever was booked in the theater that week.
Right.
Anyway,
yeah.
You want to go back to Jersey for some reason.
Yeah. Mary Poppins had a big influence on you. What was the picture or what was the short subject? What was the thing that made you go, this is what I want to do?
Well, you have to understand, I got into animation a great deal later than my classmates.
Okay.
I'm a very late bloomer.
Okay.
I didn't get interested in animation at all until I was 16.
Okay.
Brad Bird was on a first-name basis with Milt Kahl when he was 7. And all of the guys in my class, except one, were on a list at Disney's before CalArts even started. I was a latecomer.
Right.
I was interested in drawing, but I wasn't sure of what.
Mm-hmm.
And I was assigned a media project in an English class,
mm-hmm.
an animated film, which was cut paper, and I discovered I liked it.
Yeah.
And I won't repeat what's in several other interviews, but due to a remarkable series of coincidences,
mm-hmm.
I got to send a little film I made out to the Disney studio at the suggestion of someone in their Cranford, New Jersey office, Vince Donnelly. Disney had their East Coast headquarters for the educational media in my hometown.
Wow. What was that?
Cranford, New Jersey.
Wow.
And the whole reason anybody heard of any of this is my dad would go drinking in he plays pool and get a beer and eat pizza in his little bar.
Mm-hmm.
Talked about this little film I made, and his friend goes, well, I know somebody in New York owns an optical house. It's a woman. Bring your daughter over.
Right.
And then they said, well, there's a guy up the street teaches animation named Ray Setti. So I started learning animation a year before I went to CalArts in New York. Those tests sadly are gone. It's a pity because they were actually very good.
Yeah, I believe it.
And I had to unlearn because East Coast in those days numbered their X sheets differently. We did a lot of things differently from California.
That's right. Different pegs, different peg holes.
Pegs. I was using Oxberries. You got it. But that was not the issue. Yeah. The issue was closure sheet.
Yeah.
So the main thing is none of us at CalArts were absolute beginners. We all had some experience making some kind of film.
Right.
And I thought and didn't know anything. It turned out I was as qualified as anybody else, but I was one of only 3 girls in the class.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them dropped out almost immediately. I looked at what the guys were doing and I said, okay, I'm going to have to work really hard to catch up because I never had life drawing. If you look at what Jerry Reeves was doing in high school, it's like, duh. And John Musker was doing incredible stuff in life drawing. Okay, I got to catch up with these guys.
Yeah.
So I worked like a horse on life drawing the first year.
Okay.
And design was always a pitfall, but it was crucial. And design course for Bill Moore was problematic because he would swear at you. He would tell you your work was garbage and worse things.
Mm-hmm.
And nowadays he couldn't do that, but back then you sucked it up.
Yeah.
And when I finally started to understand what he was saying, my work got better. And when we were asked by Tom Cito, who in CalArts would we induct into the great educators for animation, it was unanimous for Bill Moore.
Right.
Even though there were other, Teehee was wonderful, Ken O'Connor was all great.
Right.
It was crucial because without him, without design, you can't do layout, you can't design characters.
Right.
You don't know how to use color. You don't know anything about how to make a decent looking film.
Right.
So that was the core, that was the base, that was the seed with which all the other classes grew.
Yeah. Wonder if it was like that at Disney back in the 30s, that, they would look at something and they would tell you it was crap.
Oh, very definitely so. I have the old lectures from Don Graham's classes, and you can see some of my teachers were in those classes asking questions.
Wow.
And they're talking about, well, you can go over onto the feature, which is in the case of Snow White.
Mm-hmm.
And you aren't going to always be doing ducks. Well, there's nothing wrong with doing Donald Duck, but it was considered second class after the features came in.
Right. All the shorts were second class at that point.
No. If you look at the films up to 1939, Ugly Duckling is another cartoon in my top 10.
Yes. Just watched it again.
Another stunner and heartbreaking. Yeah. The scene with he thinks he's got a friend and it's a duck decoy that hits him.
Yeah.
The acting.
And then
so wonderful.
And the decoy, when he turns back to look at him, the decoy is turning his back on him slowly.
Yes. It's gorgeous.
Yes.
So, did you see the Chaplin influence in that one?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's the duck talk is from City Lights.
Yeah.
Chaplin has a woman making a speech, because that's what early talkies sounded like in bad speakers.
Mm-hmm.
And they're using duck calls and things instead of dialogue. And that's used beautifully in Ugly Duckling, where the Papa Duck says, "That's not mine." You can plainly hear him say that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. There's a big argument. That's not mine.
Wonderful cartoon. Wonderful. Just gorgeous in every respect. Just stunning.
Oh, it's beautiful.
But also, I love a Donald cartoon from 38 called Donald's Better Self, which is a dress rehearsal for Pinocchio.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's got some of the same gags, like the smoking the cigar and getting the watery eyes and turning green.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And it's about good and evil, about listening to the bad guy instead of the one you should be listening to. So you can see it's almost a rehearsal.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's also the most beautiful duck. Beautiful design.
I also watched The Old Mill lately, last week. And character animation isn't that great in it, but the effects animation in it is unbelievable. I mean,
what's interesting is the main character is an inanimate object.
Mm-hmm.
By making it a windmill, they bring some animation into it, but they do something quite shocking with the editing, if you look carefully at that one.
Mm-hmm. As
the pacing starts to build, there's some really good cutting going on. Then they suddenly cross the line.
Mm-hmm.
Flop the image.
Yeah.
For 1 second, the mill is facing the wrong way and then back. That puts you slightly off balance.
Right.
Just before the lightning bolt hits, look carefully. There is a technically bad shot in there.
Yeah.
It's there on purpose. And they got that from Buster Keaton.
Wow.
He does it in The General.
Yeah.
To misdirect you in a scene. Why did he do that? Oh, it's because he doesn't want you to see him pulling that pin out and the whole train is left behind and he's just got the engine.
Wow.
He's the line.
Yeah.
So yes, you can, if you know what you're doing, you can break the rules.
Do you have any questions or comments about the podcast? Please email Brian at Cartoonerific.com. Your email may be featured in one of our future shows.
Well, that was a fun interview. And we're going to have more from Nancy next week on the Cartoonerific podcast, so please come back for that. You know, the Cartoonerific podcast is on Facebook, and you can check out our page there. It's Cartoonerific Classic Animated Cartoons, and just join that page, and when a new podcast is uploaded, and you're notified through Facebook, please share it to all your friends, and that would help us out a big deal. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast, we're basically all over the place. We're on YouTube and Spotify, Apple Podcasts, just everywhere. And so please click the subscribe button on your favorite service, and you'll always be notified every time a new podcast is uploaded for your listening pleasure. There you go. I said it. I know, it's the usual stuff that I say. Anyway, I want everybody to have a great day. I want you to have an excellent week, and we'll see you all again next time. Thank you for tuning in.
This has been a Cartoonerific Studios presentation.
The Cartoonerific podcast is copyright 2024 by Cartoonerific Studios Incorporated. All rights reserved.